Welcome to the Clear Admit MBA Admissions Podcast. I'm Graham Richmond, and this is your WireTaps for Monday, September 12th, 2022. I'm joined by Alex Brown from Cornwall, England. Alex, how are things going?
Very good, thank you, Graham.
So it's kind of a difficult week last week with the Queen passing away. I mean, this is a pretty crazy time in England in general. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt. It's quite difficult right now in the UK, and it's a very, very sad loss for all of us, but especially those of us in the UK. But yeah, we're talking MBA admissions, so I don't want to dwell on my personal.
Well, it's funny though, because one of the things I was realizing is that London Business School sits on land that is owned by the Queen, and the building that they're in, the main building, I believe, is kind of in a perpetual free lease to the school. And so that, they're definitely in mourning there. We heard from some colleagues there. So yeah, I was just thinking about it. And so there's a little bit of relevance to MBA stuff, given that I think the Queen actually was involved in the kind of creation of the first two business schools in the United Kingdom with respect to Manchester and London Business School. Yeah. So just kind of interesting.
Yeah, very good. She leaves a big legacy.
Yeah, definitely. So speaking of business schools, we're actually running a new survey on the website, and we need help. So if you're listening to this podcast, we would love for you to fill out this little survey that we're running, which is basically, we want to know what you think of a whole bunch of different U.S. business schools in terms of their brand and academic strengths. And so it's a fun survey. You get to weigh in. You don't have to be an expert on the schools, because we're really just trying to figure out, what do you kind of know, just kind of basic level knowledge as you enter the admissions process and are starting to apply to schools. So you can fill out the survey by going to bit.ly/MBA brands. And that's all one word, all lowercase. So I'm really looking forward to seeing like what the results are on that survey. But that's a new one we're running. Would really appreciate people filling it out. It really helps us to understand how candidates perceive these different schools in the marketplace.
Is there a bonus prize for?
Oh, yeah.
Usually
yes.
You have an incentive, Graham.
Sorry, I'm totally, yeah. So there is. So actually, we're giving away one $200 Amazon gift card, and then I think we're giving away like 20 $25 Amazon gift cards as well. So there'll be like 21 winners or whatever from who take the survey, who get some money to spend at Amazon. So yeah, take the survey. You might get a card. Usually the odds are pretty good because these aren't giant surveys that we run. So yeah, give it a shot. That would be really helpful. And thanks for reminding me, Alex, about the incentives. Let's talk about what's going on though. I mean, last week was a busy week for some deadlines, but I think we continue on this week, right? There's still more deadlines. And so do you want to run down some of what's going on?
There's more deadlines over the next several weeks.
Yeah.
Certainly over the next couple of weeks, it's sort of M7, top 10, and then it drops down a tier or two. But this upcoming week, it's Stanford and Yale, Kellogg and Stern are the sort of big hitters with deadlines. And obviously, Columbia is a sort of open enrollment for their early decision deadline. So,
right.
So yeah, things are rolling along.
Good. And then the next thing will be interview invitations. And I want to jump the gun there, but I'm excited. I wanted to mention that we published a kind of a chart that helps candidates understand which schools are doing interviews where, like which schools are, still 100% virtual for interviews, and which schools are, going to be, allowing people to come to campus. And Alex, what was the impetus for that? Because that was kind of an interesting thing.
As you know, Graham, it was our webinar for ClearAdmit Plus, and a question that was asked, and we didn't have the answer.
Right.
So we asked our colleague, Lauren, who's in charge of producing our content, if that's a piece that we could put together. Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, so we have that up on the site now if people are curious where they're going to get to interview on campus and where they're going to still be doing things virtually. It's interesting. There are not that many schools doing things in person still. So it's still a virtual, virtual kind of dominates for now. The other big news, or just kind of site news, is that, we continue to publish a lot of great content. I mean, I'm always just overwhelmed as we get back into the admission cycle here, how much stuff we're putting out there. So we have another Real Humans piece about Cornell, their 5 students profiled. Given that one of Cornell's essay questions requires you to kind of do some, deep dive into the culture of the school and really understanding courses and everything else, this is kind of must-read material if you're going to be applying to Cornell. So check that out on the site. We also ran admissions director Q&As with Yale. Our friend Bruce Delmonico was the guest from Yale. He's the dean of admissions there. We checked in with Diego Malta, who's also a longtime friend of the show and of Clear Admit, and he's the director of admissions at UT Austin McCombs. So we did an admissions director Q&A with him. And then lastly, we also checked in with Betsy Ryan at Minnesota Carlson. So 3 new admissions director Q&As that people should be reading if they're interested in those programs. And then, Alex, you and I, this has been something we've been kind of obsessing over, but we've continued to publish these class profiles as the schools kind of release data. And so we ran class profiles for both Columbia and Duke in the last week. And I have to say, like, I'm a little bit frustrated because I just wish there was more consistency in the reporting from one school to the next. Like, it's as a numbers geek, like I do like to be able to compare apples to apples. And sometimes the schools are just reporting different stuff. And so I know you and I have been talking about that, but let's dive in just briefly here, if you'll indulge me, and I'll kind of give you some of the key stats let's start with Columbia, right? So Columbia has a average GPA for the incoming class of 3.6. The GMAT average is a 729. They do not report a GRE average, and they don't also tell us what percentage of the class took which test. So that's a little bit of a deviation from some other schools. The incoming class has 44% women, which is up 3% from last year. The incoming class is also 51% international, and that too is up about 3%. Their application volume was down 5%. So not down quite as much as some of the other schools that we've been reviewing, but still down. And then, I did a little bit of number crunching, and I'm not great at this, but I was kind of curious, like what sort of differences we see between, the class of 23 versus this class of 24. And basically the class of 2023 at Columbia had an 18% acceptance rate. This class has a 22% acceptance rate. And I think it's because they had slightly fewer applicants, but they actually admitted more candidates this year than last year in order to bring in a class of a similar size. So I'll just stop there. But what do you make of these Columbia numbers?
So they admitted more and have a smaller class size.
No, the class size is actually the same this year, but they admitted more students to yield that class size.
Yeah, so that's interesting because that again suggests to me less applicants in the pool applying to more top programs each. So that median number of schools that people are applying to, I think, has crept up this season and so forth. But the other interesting thing is, it doesn't surprise me that Columbia sits at 51% international. Mm-hmm. They're in New York City. New York City is probably the biggest target city for international students across North America. So they have that luxury, I think, of being able to increase that international component without lowering quality. It doesn't surprise me they're able to, a GMAT of 730 or plus or minus a point, and so on and so forth. It's quite impressive that you can increase the female representation whilst also increasing the international representation. So that's actually quite impressive. Not bad. Not bad.
Yeah, no, and I think, it's actually similar. I think with the women, I think some of it's New York as well, because New York's such a great destination.
Yeah.
One of the things I've heard schools say is that, that New York has this advantage in that some of the women applying to business school, have partners or spouses who have jobs, and that New York's an easier place to kind of convince someone to stay or to move to, right? Because there's so much a kind of an abundance of offerings there, right? So I think that helps as well in terms of their ability to attract women. In any event, so that's their stats. Then we move over to Duke. So Fuqua, they don't, this is where I was getting to that apples to apples thing. They don't share an average GPA. So they just give the middle 80%, and that's 3.1 to 3.9 in terms of the GPA. They do this.
So it could be 3.2.
Right. It could be. Although, the other thing is, it could,
basically their GPAs could all be sitting at 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, 3.2, 3.1, and then they could have one 3.8. And
Right.
that
It
would
keeps
give
that. Yeah.
them the ability to publish that range. So to me, this is ridiculous that a school can get away with publishing only ranges and not either the median or the average.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on there. Then they did the same thing for the GMAT. So the GMAT middle 80%, again, 680 to 760.
So the average could be 685.
Yeah, it's possible. Although, and the other thing is, I looked at last year, and that those numbers both moved 10 points in either direction. So I think last year was like 690 to 750.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's a widening, kind of whatever you would call it, span. They did give, and this is let's see, no, let's see, yeah, they gave an average for GRE. So even though they give this middle 80% for GMAT. For the GRE, they just give an average. So I think that's kind of strange. Like, why aren't they being consistent? But the number there was 3.
They're completely cherry picking how they report data, which should not
Yeah.
be. You just don't do that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
So
don't get it. Yeah,
GRE is 317. That's the average.
which is crazy.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's just, yeah, it's definitely a little bit of an outlier compared to some of the peers. They do have 48% women, which is unchanged from last year, and they have 52% international students. That's up 5% from the year prior. They did not report application volume. So, some schools do, some schools don't. They did say that they have, let's see, last year's class was 447 students in terms of the size. And this year's class that's just joined is 399. So the class is a bit smaller this year. So again,
That's 10% off.
yeah, so I think we're seeing they must have had a decline in application volume, which probably leads to the slightly smaller class size in order for them to maintain the stats. Although we don't really know with the stats because of the ranges, so it's a little
Yeah.
it's a little ambiguous, all of it. But it is what it is.
I mean, that percent women and international is obviously very comparable to Columbia and other
Yeah.
top programs. So, so kudos for that. But I don't get this method of reporting.
Yeah.
And having a 10% smaller class size, unless that was predetermined, that was a goal for them, which I don't
Yeah.
remember hearing that at all. That's a big miss. Just in terms of basic revenue for the school, that's a big loss.
The only thing that I wondered was, and I would need to do some digging on this, is I did wonder if the class prior was bigger because of some deferrals from COVID, and so maybe they did want to get. So I'd have to look historically at what size the class is. So it could be that they always have about 400, and that they were over last year and they're coming back down. But I suspect it's probably a little mix of both. So anyway, let's see, one last housekeeping item, and then we can get into the candidates that you've selected for this week. Oh, actually, I know there's one thing you want to talk about too. So we have a couple of things here, but the last thing I had was that this Wednesday at noon Eastern, I am going to MC an online webinar with admissions directors from Berkeley, Yale, Chicago, Wharton, and Cornell. And so really looking forward to that, to sitting down with these schools and talking about their essays. That's all we're going to talk about is essay questions. And so if you're looking at these programs, definitely come on out. It's always a lot of fun to kind of pepper the admissions folks with questions. And then each school does a breakout at the end where you can go in and hang out with their admissions director and ask your own questions. So coming out to that, you can sign up by going to bit.ly/Clear Admit Fall, because these are our fall events, and that's all one word, all lowercase. Alex, you had something you wanted to talk about before we do the candidates this week.
Yeah, and just before we do that, I think you have about 400 folks signed up for that event, right? So
I think it's even more now. Yeah, it's crazy.
And,
we always get a lot of
sign-ups are still available. So these events are very popular. But yes, so a question came up on Reddit, Graham. So when I'm not looking at ApplyWire or whatever, sometimes I'll bounce over to Reddit. And the question is, and I think it's a really interesting question that not often comes up, but from year to year, we tend to get a question similar to this. If I've got a DUI, which is a criminal conviction, should they declare the DUI in their application, even if the school doesn't explicitly ask for any sort of convictions and so on and so forth? What should a candidate be doing in this case, Graham?
Yeah, this is a tough one because on the one hand, I would say, wow, if they're not asking you to report on any, prior convictions or trouble with the law, then why would you go out and share it? On the other hand, you and I both know that when you get into a school, and actually applicants may not know this, but when you get in, most of the programs run background checks to just verify that you kind of are who you say you are. And so it'll come up then, because part of the background check is going to be a criminal record check. They're going to verify your employment, your salary, dates of employment. They'll verify your transcript. So that there's a pretty thorough process, at least at some of the top schools, because they want to make sure they're getting the genuine article. And so I guess if you think about the fact that it could come out, maybe it's best to be out in front on it. I have to say, I mean, it's not good. I mean, you don't really want to have a DUI when you're applying to school, because it suggests a lack of judgment, or, potentially a problem with alcohol. I mean, it sort of opens up a Pandora's box. So, I mean, what would you do if a school's not asking?
I mean, I think you declare it and you use the optional essay to address it, because the thing is, if the school finds out through a background check, you have no recourse to sort of add the context or whatever. They're just going to have that knee-jerk reaction and say, well, there's a criminal conviction here. That's a problem, so we're going to rescind the offer or something like that. Rather than if you declare it up front, and maybe there's some mitigating circumstance, and hopefully there's a huge learning lesson, and hopefully there's change in behavior as a result of this episode that has manifested in, all the growth and everything that the candidate's gone through. So to me, it's probably something that you want to head out up front, and sort of try to add the context and the learning. And, it then shows that you're being very sort of transparent and upfront about who you are and the mistakes you've made and how you've learned and grown.
Yeah.
I agree with you. It's never a good thing to have to deal with this. But if you deal with it and deal with it up front, I think you have a better ways to sort of mitigate the issue.
Yeah, I agree. I will say, if something does come up in a background check that the school doesn't like, usually they will come to you first and say, so you might have a chance to speak to it, but I agree with you. I think if you don't have a choice but to be out in front on it.
Right. But I agree with that, Graham. They will get back to you and ask you about it.
But they're going to be shocked.
But I think it's better that you bring it up and add the context, rather than you then having to be on the back foot defending something.
Yeah, could not agree more. So I think this is a really great question. I did want to say, if people have questions like this that maybe they don't even want to share on Reddit, like, they can always just email us at info@clearedmit.com, and we can then speak about it on the show in a very anonymous, kind of way to get at it. But this is an interesting one. And you're right. It seems like it comes up every year because there are people who have DUIs and who want to go to business school. So yeah. So I agree, though. You want to be on the front foot, not on the back foot on this type of thing. Yeah. So,
and it might not be a DUI. There could be plenty of circumstance that you're worried about divulging. But it's always better to be on the front foot, better to be transparent and open and show that learning than running the risk of it coming back and biting you later in the admissions process.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. All right, so unless you have anything else, I suggest we get into our candidates for this week.
Let's do it. Kick on.
So this,
as the Queen would say, let's kick on.
All right, so this is WireTaps candidate number 1. So this week's first candidate wants to start school, I think next year, although it's funny, they say 24 in their note, but I guess we'll talk about that. They're currently working as an analyst, a risk analyst for a Fortune 50 bank. They want to pivot into either consulting or tech after business school, and the companies that they have on the target list are mostly consulting firms like Bain, BCG, Deloitte, Ernst & Young, McKinsey. Their GMAT score is a 690. And they have a GPA of 3.6. They've been working for 4 years, and they're located in the southeast of the United States. They do want to land, however, in New York City, and they're kind of curious about school recommendations. And as of now, the list of schools is Carnegie Mellon, Cornell, Duke, Michigan, NYU, UT Austin, and Yale. So they have 7 schools on the target list. And so I'll stop there. I mean, you had some conversation with this individual in terms of trying to help shape a school list, but even before we get into that, do you want to just speak to what you think of their candidacy? That 690, 3.6, 4 years in kind of banking, risk analysis and stuff. But yeah, what do you make of this candidacy?
I mean, you're at Wharton, Graham. Would this profile, like a risk analyst, would some of your classmates come from this sort of background?
Yeah, there's definitely there are folks working in this domain. I mean, it's not as common as like strategy consulting or investment banking, but there are people working in there are a lot of I've had some classmates coming from like
I only ask because they say they do plenty of volunteer work.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're doing volunteer work about stuff they're truly passionate about, and that sort of resonates, and they could talk about that in their application. If their work experience is good and they get strong recs that sort of corroborate that and so forth. I think the target programs that they have listed are absolutely fantastic. Tepper, Cornell, Duke, Ross, and so on and so forth. That's sort of top 16 to the edge of the top 16.
Mm-hmm.
But and maybe their 690 is slightly lower than average, but we don't absolutely know that. I was just looking to see if Duke was on their list. Duke is on their list, and 690 is within their
80%
published range, right? So it could be the average. We're not sure about Duke, but anyway, joking aside. My sort of pushback with this candidacy is if they think that they can improve that test score, even if it's 20 or 30 points, but they think there's room for improvement, they really need to go all in and do a second test. Because if this profile was 720, 730, 3.6 GPA, decent work experience, good volunteer experience, comes across as a really likable, good candidate, whatever, and so on and so forth, I think not only would they be well within range of these target programs, that they might even take a punt at a couple of M7 programs.
Yeah.
So I know they don't want to retake the GMAT, and I know that their profile as it currently sits may be make the current schools that they're targeting accessible. I'm not saying it won't, but I just think that they could strengthen their chances of the programs they got listed with a slightly higher GMAT, but they could open up a whole new set of opportunity also.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that you're speaking about their activities and your knowledge that they don't necessarily want to take the test again, you're just reminding me that, the site has this feature where you can leave comments that are kind of direct messages. So I think this person kind of had a private conversation with you. So that is a feature on the site. I don't know if everyone is aware of that, but in any event, I guess, the thing that I worry about is I look at this list of schools and I look at the numbers and I'm like, they might get into some of them. It's very possible, especially with a strong application. As you say, from the comments they left, they seem like a likable person and they have a well-rounded candidacy with decent work experience and activities and stuff. But I also could see them striking out, if things don't sort of work out. And so that's where, that GMAT score kind of looms large for me. It would be nice to see a slightly higher mark there. But, and the other thing I was going to ask you is they want to land in New York City. And so I get Yale, I get Stern, even Carnegie Mellon and Cornell placing a lot of people into New York. But then they do have, some other schools on the list, whether it's Michigan or UT Austin, Duke. I mean, again, these schools all have, alumni bases in New York City, as does, any kind of top school on earth, right? But I just wondered whether are they looking, because they're asking for recommendations on school selection and things like that.
Right.
And so I just wondered, are they forgetting any schools? Should the list be, shifted in any way, or do you think it's sort of a good setup here?
Yeah, I mean, it does make you wonder. Like UT Austin probably could be, skipped in this regard, and target one or two other programs that are a little bit more sort of in that Mid-Atlantic, Northeast region. That might then point again, if they had a higher GMAT, to a couple of M7s into the mix, right? So you might be looking at Sloan, you might be looking at Columbia or Wharton or whatever in that mix, and there might be one or two in the top 16 that are also a better fit. But if they want to be in New York City, Texas, a program based in Texas just makes it a little bit more difficult to get to New York City. And not only that, once you're in New York City, the value of that Texas network to sort of, for as you step along with your career, is similarly going to be a little less valuable than the network from, let's say, Stern or Yale or whatever. So certainly that's important to bear in mind in this case.
Yeah. And I guess the other question would be, like you were saying, are there schools on the East Coast that would be potentially better fits for network and things? I mean, I don't know. I was thinking actually about if they don't retake the GMAT, I wondered about Georgetown as a potential, great brand, obviously, on the East Coast and world over.
And Georgetown makes more sense than Austin.
Maybe, yeah.
And they sit in that same tier, right? So I think that's a really good example.
Yeah. So for that, this is for them to explore and get to know these schools and things and make that decision about the test. Obviously, yeah, if it were up to you and I, it sounds like we would have them retake the test, maybe boost the score, and that would shape the school selection too. So they kind of need to figure this out. But again, everything does seem to line up pretty well. It's just that the scores, whatever it is, 20 points light or something, right, for some of these schools. So.
I mean, the key here is maybe they think that 690 is their maximum score.
Yeah, it's possible.
And I totally get that, and then run with it.
Yeah.
But if they think there's a little bit of room for improvement because they could prep a little harder or they could have done something a little bit differently, then to me you're not maximizing your effort across the entire application. It's kind of like you did a couple of drafts of your essays, they're good enough, I'm going to submit the application, rather than making sure those essays really are representing you as well as they can do, et cetera. So that's my point there. If they think there's room for improvement, they should do it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, excellent advice. I want to thank them for sharing their profile and wish them the best of luck as they travel through the admissions process here. Let's move on.
And probably just one last thing, Graham. I don't think there's necessarily a rush to be in round one in this case.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily overrepresented. So if their question is, well, I've got to get the apps in by, certain September or October, split them round one and round two and go after a few programs in round two with a second GMAT score or something.
Yeah, great.
I mean, we're going to talk about that with another candidate.
Absolutely.
So that might be an option.
Yeah, good point. All right, so I want to thank them again. And let's move on, though, and talk about WireTaps candidate number 2. So this candidate has 8 schools on the target list. They're looking to go to school next fall, and the schools are Cornell, Dartmouth, Duke, NYU, Toronto, so Rotman, UNC Keenan-Flagler, McCombs at UT Austin, and then UVA Darden. This candidate is interesting in that their career to date, for the last 5 years or so, has been as a corporate lawyer, and they want to pivot out of that and get into consulting after business school. They have a GMAT score of 710. Their GPA was an 80 out of 100, and now everyone probably knows that they're in India because the scale's out of 100 in India. They also have done hundreds of hours of volunteer work over the last 5 years and have a lot of leadership experience. That's what they claim in their note. Their long-term goal is to go back to India. So after doing some consulting, they want to go back to India, and they'd love to start a nonprofit or a kind of social enterprise that relates to the cause that they've been volunteering with over the last 5 years. And, they just mentioned they've been promoted early and that they're mostly concerned about their GMAT at 710, given that they're in an overrepresented group as an Indian. So they're wondering about which round 1, round 2, and they're wondering about, does that hurt their chances if they wait to round 2, not only as an Indian, but also for scholarship dollars? So I'll turn it over to you, Alex. What do you make of this candidacy and, some of the answers to their questions?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there is going to be an incentive to be in round 1 for this candidate, and we went through some back and forth on ApplyWire, and it looks like they're going to split their apps between rounds 1 and round 2.
Yeah.
Tried to get an improved GMAT in October, and potentially then they could report their new GMAT score, if it's higher obviously, to the schools they targeted in round 1 if they can get that GMAT done prior to the interview invitation process. That would be advantageous too. And so forth. So that seems to be what they're sort of targeting. What we don't know, Graham, and I know you would bring this up, so I'll just bring it up now anyway, is the breakout of that GMAT. Because they're a lawyer, sometimes there's speculation they don't have the quant chops in terms of their preparation for business school. So it would be good to know what the quant score on the GMAT is, because obviously that's a pretty good indicator of their sort of quant profile and so forth. So, I mean, at the end of the day, unfortunately, even though they're a corporate lawyer, which will sort of distinguish them, separate them a little bit from this overrepresented pool, they're still going to be in this overrepresented pool. So that's the challenge that they have. And if they come back with a slight, with a higher GMAT, that's great. But round 2 is more challenging than round 1. So that's the issue that they face. That's why they've got to split their apps between round 1 and round 2, and so forth. It sounds like they've done a lot of volunteer work, which we really like. What I do like is their volunteer work ties to their long-term goal. They didn't reveal what this is, i.e. the nature of the volunteer work and the nature of the long-term goal, but I do like the idea that they're tied together.
Yeah, agreed.
So that's very good. I'm not entirely sure I'm convinced they've done a lot of volunteer work, because 200 plus hours over a period of
5 years.
5 years is less than an hour a week. So keeping that in context, but doing something about which you're passionate, that is also then tied to your long-term goal, that is something that is very favourable. So yeah, I mean, a potentially interesting candidate with an interesting dilemma in terms of the GMAT retake, round 1 versus round 2.
Yeah, so I think you've done a great job of summarizing the key issues here. I want to add 2 things. One is just a comment about lawyers, which you knew I was going to bring up, which is that, I think on the whole, admissions readers like lawyers because they're not super numerous in the applicant pool, and they bring kind of a different perspective. They also usually have a really good kind of rationale for wanting to go to business school, and it usually goes, something along the lines of, wow, I've been kind of enforcing the rules and regulations. I've been kind of a referee in the game that is business, and I want to actually get on the field and play, and so I'm going to go to business school. So they usually can make a really clear, easy kind of case for the transition. But then, as you also point out, lawyers are often scrutinized for whether or not they have those quantitative skills. And so, yeah, I would love to know what's the quant score on the GMAT, and also what was their undergraduate study around. I mean, was it just law, or do they have a bunch of kind of quantitative coursework that they can point to? Because that's going to be a concern, right? So that's one thing, and that would be relevant to any lawyer that's thinking about business school. It is interesting, this dilemma of are they Indian, are they overrepresented as an Indian or underrepresented as a lawyer? It's probably a bit of both, and so applying across the 2 rounds makes sense to me. I think, they probably, if they're applying in round 1, they may want to indicate in the optional essay that they're not satisfied with that GMAT score and that they have a new test that they're taking in October and that the score will be forthcoming. They'll provide it to the school. I think that makes sense, right? Wouldn't you want those schools to know that it's coming, or would you kind of just wait until you take it and then tell them on the spot when you get the next result, risking that they're not going to wait for it?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Because, they don't know that they're necessarily going to get a higher score.
Right.
They're hoping to. So then they've got to go back to the school and say, actually, I got a 690 in this second test, so deal with it as you may. So they run that risk. But if they think they've got, they're going to get the high score, it might be worth signaling. I mean, I don't think they're overreaching with their target programs, quite frankly. Which is good, right? So, they're looking again at top 16 to, a couple on the edge of that top 16, and then they sort of put Rotman in there too. So they're not overreaching, I don't think. I think they're being quite realistic and pragmatic with their choice of schools. 7-10, the score that they have, if it does show quant chops, might well be good enough anyway in round 1. That's why I'm not sure I would necessarily signal it. But yeah, I mean, they could do that.
Yeah, you're kind of convincing me. I feel like, maybe they go in with the 7-10 and then just if they get good news, send it in. By
No,
October, most of these schools will not
no.
have made a decision, as we know. So, yeah, let's just see what happens.
What do you think? What do you think of their not it's not their avatar, but their username?
Oh, okay. Well, wait a second. I didn't pay close attention to this, but it's
You
Alt.
usually tell
I
me
know.
about these
Alt
things.
MBA. Yeah, I guess. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's not bad.
yeah,
um,
yeah. But isn't that a type of program that you can study? Alt MBA, isn't that the antithesis of getting a
yeah.
traditional
Yeah,
MBA?
maybe. Yeah,
So
I
I'm
don't
not
know.
sure.
Yeah, well, they
Yeah,
have earned a couple of likes already, so they're on their way. People on the site,
yeah,
obviously, if people like your comments, you get points, as people maybe have noticed, and then eventually you get stars. So I think obviously for people tuning in or applying this year, the more that you comment and get likes, the more you get stars. And we often introduce some rewards programs, so everyone can stay tuned for that as we get into the
yeah,
season here. But Alex, we're running long, so let's get into our final candidate for this week. If you,
yeah. This one will be
all right,
quick.
all right. So this is
This candidate's already
yes.
applied, so we have no advice for them, but we're just
We're
going
going to
to,
comment though. Yeah.
yeah,
All right. So
exactly.
this is WireTaps candidate number 3. It's a candidate that is going to be starting in the fall of 23 or hopes to. They're applying just to 3 schools, and those schools are Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton, often known as the trilogy in our world. They've been working at Bain in London as a consultant, and after business school, they're going to continue to do some consulting. It looks like again with Bain, I believe they're sponsored, and they ultimately want to get into venture capital. Their GMAT score is a whopping 760. They've got a perfect GPA of 4.0, and they have 4 years of work experience to date. As I mentioned, they're located in London. They're going to return to London after business school. A couple of wrinkles, though. They mentioned that they are an Indian male and a citizen of India, but they've been working, I guess, in London. They have had a couple of promotions, one of which was accelerated. They also already have a master's degree in finance from a top UK school. So let's assume that's like LSE or LBS or something. I mean, it could be somewhere else, but probably one of those top schools. And they did an undergraduate engineering degree also in London. So while they are from India and they're an Indian citizen, all their education's been in the UK, in both engineering and finance. And they mentioned they have strong extracurriculars at work and in their community. And they're wondering, what are their chances, and will being an Indian male hinder their candidacy in any way?
Yeah, I mean, they've already applied, so they checked the one box, which is make sure you apply in round 1 as an overrepresented candidate. I mean, their profile is pretty outstanding in terms of their numbers, 760, 4.0. They've got a master's degree, probably from top universities, and so forth. They're working for a blue chip company, Bain. They've obviously done very well there, a couple of promotions. They're working in the London office. And obviously they're academics from the UK. So there's lots and lots and lots of stuff to like. What really I do like, however, is the strong extracurriculars, not only at work but in the community. We obviously, again, don't know what they are. But for a candidate like this that's only targeting the very, very best programs, if everything else checks off very well, like it does for this candidate, oftentimes it's what they're doing outside of work that's like, wow, that's really interesting. So if I knew what that was, that might help a little bit. But I say they've got a pretty good chance at one of these top 3. And that's the only question they asked us, so that's all we got to answer, right, Graham?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I do worry about sometimes, whenever I see someone only applying to these 3, I just get nervous because I've seen many a candidate with perfect numbers and an otherwise kind of perfect profile, just
Yeah,
not. I mean, you can strike out at the top 3. I mean, it happens all the time, right? So, I think obviously their odds at Wharton are greater than the other 2 because the admissions acceptance rate's a little bit higher there. I think they're going to get into one of them, I would hope, but it's not a guarantee. And so the other thing I mean, not that the schools would know this, but whenever I see someone that's only applying to these 3, I worry that they're maybe kind of a rankings hound, and I'm sort of like, they're going back to Bain, they want to get into VC. Are there any other schools that could help them to do this? It's not like they're using the MBA to completely pivot their career. I mean, they're sponsored, it sounds like, or at least they have a job waiting for them.
yeah.
So, they probably could have a really successful career and go to MIT or, Kellogg or Chicago or
Or
LBS,
LBS.
right? There are many
Yeah,
schools that could help them in their career. And so obviously, Harvard and Stanford and Wharton are not going to ask them where else they've applied. I mean, it could come up in an interview potentially, but it probably won't. And so they'll probably be able to steer clear of that. But I will say, whenever you hear about a candidate that's just sort of has this obsession around the top three, you sometimes worry, what are they going to business school for? Is it just to sort of throw the brand on the resume, or what? Because they would get a great education at any of those other programs I mentioned. And I'm not saying that, it's not like I went to Wharton, like I know the value of a top school, but I also, from being in this industry for so long, know that you can do some great things at these other programs too. So we'll see. I mean, they're going to get word in the first round, so they could always pivot and apply in round two to some other schools, but we'll see what they do. I mean, maybe they'd wait another year.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge there is because they're overrepresented.
Yeah.
If they are looking at the next tier down, they need to do that in round one.
Yeah, it's tricky.
So, I mean, is it Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, or bust? Do they have Plan B where the MBA it is not a consideration? Yeah. So if they don't get into the top three, it's perfectly fine. Bain will keep them on, and everything's good in the long run. So don't just think about the short-term goal, but in the long run, would having an MBA have really been helpful. So yeah, that's my only concern here. It might well be that they've decided, or they know that they have a very good alternative plan that doesn't include an MBA.
Yeah.
But if it is MBA or bust, they really need to get that Sloan app or whatever it is into round one, and not wait till round two, where as an overrepresented candidate, things are a little bit more competitive. Now, they might well still be successful in M7 in round two or LBS in round two, but it's going to be a little bit more competitive.
Yeah.
That all said, there's lots of quality across the board in this candidate.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is a really terrific candidate.
Yeah.
I would just say, again, I go back to what I said before, it's that the only issue is that really terrific candidates don't get into these three schools pretty routinely. So that's the only thing I worry about. But I think, look, if I were a betting man, I would say they're probably going to get into one. So we'll see how it goes. But in any event, I do want to thank them for sharing, and hopefully they'll get good news in the form of some interview invitations as we move into the later days of September and into October. So we'll stay tuned. Hopefully they'll keep us updated. I did like their username, which was Joe Blogs, which is a reference to the typical test taker. I think in the Princeton Reviews kind of study guides, they give typical GMAT test taker a name, and the name is Joe Blogs. So kind of a good...
You learn something new every episode.
Yeah, so there you go. All right, so we kind of went on really long today, but we had so many things to cover with these class profiles and all this stuff. But three great candidates. Appreciate you picking them out as always. And yeah, we'll be back in 1 week's time to do it all again, Alex. All right.
Very good. Best luck, everyone. Take care.